Our son wanted us dead, but his plan backfired. It was a night when the wind scraped against the shutters like a whispering blade slipping its cold fingers through the cracks of our old wooden house. Dinner sat untouched on the table. My husband stared at the window, jaw clenched, while my own hands trembled over a loaf of bread that I could no longer slice. It wasn't the cold that made me shake. It was the sense, deep, animal, undeniable, that something inside our family had turned against us. People think betrayal comes from strangers, that the danger hides outside your front door behind a ski mask or in the shadows of an alley. But what if it walks past your kitchen table every night? What if it's the child you raised, the boy whose head once fit in your palm? We used to scoff at news stories of parents harmed by their own kids. That's what happens to other people, we said. Never us. Until it was. Our son had once been a bright-eyed boy with knees full of grass stains and a laugh that cracked open the dullest day. He used to crash into our bedroom before sunrise, shouting, "Wake up, the sun's awake." His feet slapped across the wooden floorboards, the sound like little bells announcing joy. I'd groan, bury my face in the pillow, but then he'd bounce onto the mattress with a giggle and wrap his arms around my neck. There was no resisting that. Back then, he was our whole world. My husband worked long hours, but no matter how exhausted he came home, the moment he saw our boy sprinting toward him at the gate, his face broke into a smile. They'd sit on the porch steps with watermelon slices dripping down their chins, sticky and sweet, while I watched from the kitchen window, feeling like life couldn't get richer. Birthdays were small, but magical. We'd save up for a little cake and a few candles. He'd close his eyes tight, palms pressed together, and whisper a wish. Once, after he blew out the candles, I asked what he'd wished for. He grinned shyly and said, "I wished you and Dad would stay with me forever." That was his whole dream. Not toys, not adventures, just us. There was a winter when he fell terribly ill. He lay burning with fever, cheeks flushed, breath ragged. All night I sat by his bed, stroking his hair, terrified of losing him. My husband kept bringing warm cloths to lay on his forehead, his own eyes red from worry. In a half-dream, our boy murmured, "Don't leave me, Mom. Dad, don't go." It broke me. The next morning, when his fever broke and he sat up with a sleepy smile, we thanked God under our breath. We thought we had survived the worst thing a parent could endure. We were wrong. I still remember his first day of school. He wore a crisp white shirt and a backpack too big for his shoulders. He clutched my hand at the classroom door, eyes wide, a mix of fear and excitement. When the teacher called his name, he raised his chin and answered clearly, "Here." My husband squeezed my shoulder. "He's going to be somebody," he whispered. "He's got that look." And I believed him. Our son was strong, kind, brave. He'd be our anchor one day. On weekends, we'd go to the fields outside town. He'd run ahead, hair flying, collecting wildflowers. Once he tucked a tiny bloom behind my ear and said, "Mom, you're my princess." That little boy, the one who called me princess, how could he become the man who later made me too afraid to breathe? There was a time he fell from the porch steps, scraping his knee open. Blood welled, but he didn't cry. He bit his lip and tried to stand like a little soldier. I scooped him up, pressing a kiss to his forehead. "It's okay, Mom's here." In that moment, I thought, he's going to grow into a man who protects, not harms. My husband would watch him from the doorway, pride softening his rough features. "He's special," he'd say. "He'll do great things." We never doubted it. But time is a silent thief. It steals not just days, but the light in someone's eyes. Our boy grew taller, his voice deepened, his face sharpened into adult lines. We celebrated every inch, every milestone. We didn't notice what disappeared as he gained it. At first it was small. He laughed less. He stopped telling us about school. He came to dinner but ate fast, retreating to his room where the door stayed closed. I chalked it up to adolescence. Everyone said they need space. Don't hover. So I didn't. I gave him space. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. My husband, ever the realist, said, "He's just growing up. Don't worry so much." But a mother's heart knows. It notices things logic can't explain. The way he looked at us sometimes like we were intruders. The phone calls he took in whispers. The passwords changed without explanation. Our savings dwindling in ways we couldn't track. Neighbors began to murmur, "Your boy seems different. His eyes?" I'd smile, brush it off, but inside my stomach twisted. I would tell myself he's just stressed. School friend's life. He'll come back to us. What we didn't know was that while we clung to old memories, something dark was taking root. Silence is fertile ground for shadows. As the months passed, his visits to the dinner table became rare. Sometimes he didn't come home at all. When he did, he smelled of strangers' houses and secrets. His clothes carried scents I couldn't name. He'd walk past me without a word, his shoulder brushing mine like a stranger's on a crowded street. I tried to reach him. "Son, talk to me. Are you okay?" He'd shrug, eyes flat. "I'm fine." My husband tried too, but the boy we'd raised had learned how to shut doors, not just the wooden one to his room, but the invisible one to his heart. The small betrayals grew. Items missing from the house, locked drawers, late-night noises. Once I caught a glimpse of him in the yard at 2 a.m., digging something into the soil, his movements tense and urgent. When he saw me at the window, he froze. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, I thought he might smile, might wave. Instead, he turned and melted into the dark. I lay awake that night, remembering the boy who once pressed wildflowers into my hair. Where had he gone? Or had he ever been real, and I had only dreamed him? My husband still tried to soothe me. "He's just lost. He'll find his way back." He said it with such conviction, I almost believed him. But each morning I woke with the same knot in my chest. Something was coming. I didn't know what. Only that it would be us on the receiving end. Looking back, the signs were clear. The withdrawn glances, the secret phone calls, the unexplained money. Even the way he had begun to talk about us in the third person. They don't understand, as though we weren't parents but obstacles. But at the time, denial is easier than fear. You tell yourself you're imagining things. You remember the birthday wishes, the fevered pleas, the little soldier who didn't cry. You cling to that image like a raft, because if you admit the truth, you have to face it. And we weren't ready. The night it all came to a head, the house was silent in a way I'd never felt. Not the soft silence of sleep, but the kind that hums before a storm. I remember the squeal of the floorboard, the heavy tread on the stairs. My husband's hand on mine, warm and trembling. In the dim light, I saw the glint of metal in our son's hand. Time slowed. My heart slammed against my ribs. And then his lips at my ear, a whisper that would save our lives. "Pretend we're dead." 3 words. A command, a prayer. Everything after that blurred. But that whisper marked the border between the family we had been and the strangers we were about to become. We survived that night. But survival is not the same as living. The echo of those steps, that glint of metal, the boy who was once our world, that echo has never left us. And neither has the question, how did we get here? The first cracks in a wall are easy to ignore. They look harmless, almost invisible, until one day the whole structure gives way. That's how it was with our son. It began with whispers behind closed doors. I would pass his room and hear the low murmur of his voice, urgent and secretive. The second I knocked, the voice stopped. Sometimes he would emerge with his phone clutched tight, his eyes flicking past me as though I wasn't there. I told myself teenagers keep secrets. It's part of growing up. But this didn't feel like the privacy of a boy becoming a man. It felt like conspiracy. Then came the money. Small amounts missing at first, cash from my purse, bills gone from the drawer. I thought maybe I'd misplaced them. Then our joint account began to bleed. Transfers we hadn't made, purchases we couldn't explain. My husband checked the statements and frowned, but he didn't want to believe what the numbers spelled out. He wouldn't steal from us, he said firmly. Not our boy. Not. But deep down we both knew. The neighbors whispered too. One woman, kind but blunt, stopped me outside the grocery store. Your son, she said cautiously. He's been spending time with questionable company. When I pressed her, she shrugged, unwilling to say more. But her eyes told me enough. Even his body changed. He grew thinner, his face drawn shadows under his eyes. But his stare, it was the stare that haunted me most. When he looked at me across the table, it was as if he were looking through me, past me, to something else. Or maybe to nothing at all. I tried to reach him. Son, are you in trouble? Are you unhappy? I'm fine, he snapped. Why don't you stop treating me like a kid? But the edge in his voice wasn't the impatience of youth. It was contempt. Nights became battles. He came home at hours that bled into morning. Once my husband confronted him at the door. Where have you been out? Our son said flatly. With who? None of your business. They stood facing each other, shadows long across the floor. My husband's shoulders sagged first. He stepped aside, and in that small surrender I felt something break. The house grew colder, not in temperature, but in spirit. Meals were silent, doors slammed. The boy who once tucked flowers into my hair now barely spoke to me at all. I would lie awake, replaying memories of his laughter, trying to stitch them over the silence, but it was no use. Then came the night I saw him in the yard. I woke thirsty, padded to the window with a glass of water. There he was, crouched in the dirt with a shovel. The moonlight fell across his face, pale and severe. He dug with frantic energy, buried something dark and heavy, then patted the soil smooth. I pressed my hand against the cold glass, wanting to call out, but some instinct froze my tongue. He glanced up. Our eyes locked. For a second time, stopped. If it had been the boy I remembered, he might have waved, embarrassed. Instead, his expression was unreadable, almost hostile. Then he turned and disappeared into the dark. I whispered to myself, what's happening to my son? The silence offered no answer. The unease inside me grew like a tumor. I carried it quietly, pretending at work, smiling at neighbors, but every time I returned home, the air pressed heavy on my chest. I watched him more closely, hoping to catch a glimpse of the boy I once knew, but he stayed hidden behind a mask of indifference. I began noticing notebooks stacked in his room, filled not with schoolwork, but with scribbled words. Angry, bitter, endless pages about betrayal, lies, injustice. And who was the villain in his stories? Us, his parents, the people who had fed him, clothed him, sung him to sleep. Each page read like an indictment. They don't listen, they don't trust me, they control everything. One day I'll be free. When I showed a page to my husband, his face went pale, but he still shook his head. He's venting. Kids his age write dramatic things. Dramatic, I whispered. He wrote, when they're gone, I'll finally breathe. My husband didn't answer. He simply folded the page and tucked it back into the notebook as though hiding it could erase it. The warnings weren't just written. They came from the world outside too. One evening, the local pastor stopped by. He'd seen our son lingering on street corners, falling in with older men whose eyes carried the sharpness of knives. Keep an eye on him, the pastor urged. Something in him is restless, and restlessness, if untended, becomes destruction. But what could we do? We tried grounding him. He disappeared anyway. We tried kindness. His face stayed stone. The more we reached, the further he pulled away, as if our love itself suffocated him. And yet, part of me clung to denial. I still remembered his small hand in mine, the way he once whispered, "Don't leave me," through fevered lips. That memory blinded me more than any lie he told. I wanted desperately to believe he was still that child somewhere deep inside. The last warning came from a neighbor who caught him rifling through their shed. He was looking for something sharp, they said. When I called out, he bolted. His eyes, they weren't right. I told my husband, my voice breaking. He's planning something. Can't you feel it? But he only rubbed his temples, exhausted. What do you want me to do? He's our son. Yes, our son. But what happens when your son looks at you not with love, but calculation? What happens when the blood in his veins beats not with loyalty, but with hunger for freedom, for control? Maybe even for your end. That night, I dreamed of him standing over us with a shadow that swallowed the light. I woke drenched in sweat, certain the dream was not just imagination, but prophecy. And still, we ignored it. We ate dinner like nothing was wrong. We set the table lit. The lamp tried to laugh at old jokes. Pretended we were a family, untouched by darkness. We told ourselves it was a phase. We told ourselves he'd grow out of it. We told ourselves love was stronger than whatever storm had claimed him. But love is not a shield when someone decides to strike. He night it happened began like any other, or at least, that's what we told ourselves. The lamp glowed soft in the living room. Dinner dishes were stacked, the smell of stew still lingering. My husband sat in his chair staring at the fire while I knitted half-heartedly, my needles clacking against each other without rhythm. There was a silence in the air, not peaceful, but taut, stretched like a rope, ready to snap. He wasn't home yet. Our son. The boy turned stranger. Hours ticked by on the clock, each one grinding against my nerves. Every creak of the house made me jump. My husband tried to steady me. He'll be late. That's all. But his eyes betrayed him. He was afraid too. When the front door finally groaned open, the sound sliced through the silence. Heavy footsteps crossed the threshold. He didn't call out, didn't say hello. Just the measured thud of boots against the floorboards. A metallic clang echoed the sound of something being set down, then picked up again. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at my husband, his face pale in the dim light. And then, the moment that will live in my bones forever, he leaned close, his breath warm against my ear, and whispered 3 words. Pretend we're dead. Time fractured. The words sank into me like ice. I didn't move, didn't speak, just listened as our son's footsteps drew closer. He entered the room with an air of quiet deliberation. His silhouette filled the doorway, taller, broader than I remembered. In his hand glinted the cruel shimmer of a blade, a kitchen knife, long and sharp, catching the firelight. He looked down at us with eyes I didn't recognize, eyes stripped of affection, of hesitation. We sat perfectly still, slackening our bodies as though life had already drained away. My husband slumped against the armrest, his eyes half shut. I let the knitting fall from my lap, my arms loose, my breath shallow. The trick was to breathe just enough to stay alive, but not enough to be heard. Our son moved closer. The knife caught the light again, sending a spark into the dimness. He studied us, his expression unreadable, almost clinical. Then he leaned down so close I could feel the heat of his breath and placed 2 fingers against my neck. My pulse throbbed beneath his touch. I forced it slower, weaker, praying he would believe the lie. For a moment I thought he would hear it, the furious pounding of my heart screaming that I was alive. But after a long, terrifying pause, he pulled back. "They're gone," he muttered. His voice was low, as if speaking to himself or to someone unseen. Finally, I can breathe. I wanted to cry out, to shake him, to beg for the boy I once knew to return. But my husband's grip on my hand tightened, silent warning. Don't. Stay still. Survive. Our son moved around the room, pacing. He spoke in fragments, words tumbling from his lips like pieces of a dark confession. No more rules. No more watching me. No more chains. He pressed the knife against the mantel, dragging it slowly across the wood, leaving a shallow scar. The sound scraped against my nerves until I thought I would scream. Then he disappeared into the kitchen. We heard drawers opening, cupboards slamming. He was searching for something food valuables, perhaps more weapons. Each sound was a reminder that the monster now lived in the skin of our child. Minutes stretched into hours. My legs ached from stillness. My chest burned from shallow breaths. But we didn't move. We didn't dare. At one point, he returned, standing over us again. He crouched low, his eyes scanning our faces. My husband's lids fluttered slightly, almost betraying him. The boy tilted his head, suspicious. My breath caught in my throat. Then with a smirk he muttered, "Dead. Pathetic." Just as I thought. He rose and walked away, satisfied. Every second felt like a lifetime. Every sound, every creak of the floor, every whisper of the wind outside pressed against us. We were captives in our own home, prisoners of silence and fear. But in that silence I remembered. I remembered the boy who once begged me not to leave him during a fevered night. I remembered the child who placed flowers in my hair, who called me princess, who promised to protect me. Where had he gone? Was he buried deep inside the man who now prowled our kitchen, knife in hand? Or had he been erased, completely replaced by something unrecognizable? I wanted to believe he was still there, buried beneath anger and confusion. But as I lay pretending to be dead, I realized a horrifying truth. Love is powerless in the face of a blade. The hours dragged like centuries. The house groaned around us, every board complaining under the weight of silence. My body screamed for movement, my neck stiff, my legs numb, my chest aching from shallow breaths. But still, I held still. To shift even slightly felt like handing him the proof he needed to end us. From the kitchen came the scrape of drawers, the thud of cupboards slamming. Bottles clinked, silverware rattled. Once the sharp crack of glass shattering pierced the night. He cursed under his breath, low and venomous, the way a stranger would. "Not my son. Never my son." He returned to the room where we lay. His steps were slower this time, deliberate. The knife glinted again in his hand. He loomed over us, his shadow long in the firelight. My heart hammered, desperate to burst from my chest, but I forced myself into stillness. He crouched down close enough that I could smell the sweat on his skin, the metallic tang of fear. Or was it excitement? He pressed the blade against the arm of the chair where my husband sat, slumped. Slowly, he traced a line in the wood, the edge whispering with menace. Then he whispered to himself, free at last. No more chains, no more eyes watching me. His voice was ragged, as though these words had been carved into his throat long before they ever reached his lips. Then, almost mockingly, he tapped the knife against my husband's hand. My husband didn't flinch. His stillness was a masterpiece of courage, but I knew him. I felt the tremor that ran through his fingers where they clasped mine. After a long pause, our son rose again. He paced, muttering. I caught fragments. They deserved it. Couldn't let me breathe. I had no choice. The words chilled me. He believed them. In his mind, we weren't parents. We were oppressors, enemies, obstacles to be removed. The fire sank lower in the hearth. Shadows swallowed the corners of the room. I prayed for dawn, for some crack of light to break the nightmare. But night is cruel. It stretches longest when you're trapped inside it. At one point, he left again, stomping upstairs. Drawers opened, papers rustled. I imagined him searching for documents, for money, for any sign of control he could claim, now that he thought us gone. When he returned, he carried a box. Our box. The one where we had kept mementos, old photographs, baby shoes, report cards, birthday cards. He dumped them across the floor, scattering the pieces of a life we had built together. Then he laughed, a sound that twisted in my ears, hollow and sharp. He picked up one photograph, one I remembered well, him at 5 years old, grinning with a missing tooth frosting smeared across his cheeks from birthday cake. For a heartbeat, his expression faltered. His lips pressed tight, his jaw twitched. The knife trembled slightly in his grip. And then, as quickly as it came, the flicker was gone. He tore the photo in half and let the pieces fall. I bit down on my tongue to keep from crying out. That small gesture, that destruction of memory, hurt more than the knife ever could. Time blurred. I counted heartbeats, breaths, the faint ticking of the clock. My husband's whisper echoed in my mind. Pretend we're dead. It had saved us, but it was a prison too. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, to shout. But survival meant silence. Finally, exhaustion seemed to claim him. He slumped into a chair across the room, the knife resting loosely in his hand. His head bobbed forward, then snapped back. His eyes closed, opened, closed again. The weight of his own madness pressed down until even he could not bear it. Minutes stretched, then hours. At last, his breathing deepened, steady and slow. Sleep had come. My husband squeezed my hand gently, our first movement in what felt like an eternity. His eyes met mine, speaking volumes in silence. Not yet. Wait. We waited until the sky outside shifted, until the first gray light of dawn seeped through the curtains. Only then did we move inch by inch, slow as the tide. We rose together, careful not to creak the boards, careful not to stir the monster who had once been our child. When we reached the door, the morning air hit us like baptism, sharp and cold, filling our lungs with freedom. We did not look back. We could not. Behind us in that house lay the fragments of a family shattered, a boy lost to shadows, a night we would never escape. And yet, we had survived. Because of a whisper. Because of love, twisted into instinct. Because when death reached for us, we chose silence, stillness, life. But survival carries its own weight. As we stumbled into the dawn, I knew this was not an ending. It was only the beginning of a story no parent ever wants to tell. Dawn should have meant safety. But when we slipped out into the morning air, clutching each other with trembling hands, I knew safety was an illusion. Behind us in that house, he still breathed. And sooner or later, he would wake. We staggered down the dirt road toward town, the mist curling around our legs. My husband's face was ashen, his jaw tight. Neither of us spoke. Words would have broken the fragile silence we carried, silence that had saved us. We reached the sheriff's office as the sun crept higher. The bell above the door jingled, jarring in its cheerfulness. Sheriff Daniels looked up, his expression shifting from boredom to alarm. "What happened to you two? You look like ghosts." My husband opened his mouth, but the words wouldn't come. So I spoke. My voice cracked, but the truth spilled out. "Our son tried to kill us." The sheriff froze. Papers slid from his hands. For a long moment, he simply stared, as though I had spoken a language he couldn't understand. Then he cleared his throat. "You're sure? Maybe you misunderstood. I cut him off." He pressed his fingers to my neck. He checked if we were breathing. He held a knife. My hands shook violently. "Don't tell me I misunderstood." The sheriff swallowed hard. "All right. Sit down. We'll send someone." Deputies went to the house. We waited in silence, every tick of the clock louder than the last. Hours later, one returned, his face grim. "He's gone." The house was empty when we arrived. Empty, but not abandoned. Because on the table, scrawled across the wood in jagged letters, was a message. "You thought you fooled me, but I know. This isn't over." The deputy slid a photograph across the desk. It was of the words carved deep into the table. My stomach lurched. He knew. He had known all along. The sheriff leaned forward. "We'll put out a notice. Search the roads. But you need to understand, he's your son. People will be skeptical." Skeptical. The word tasted bitter, as if blood ties erased the truth of what he had become. That night, we were placed in protective custody, a small room above the station. But protection felt paper thin. Every sound outside the window made me flinch. Every shadow became his. And then, 2 nights later, proof arrived. The deputy found our barn doors wide open, tools scattered. Inside, scratched onto the wall with a blade, were 4 words, "You can't escape me." It was his handwriting. I'd recognize it anywhere. The words carved into the barn wall were more than a threat. They were a promise. Our son hadn't just tried to kill us, he wanted us to know he was still out there watching, waiting. The sheriff doubled the patrols around our property, but fear doesn't vanish because of uniforms or badges. Fear seeps into your skin, your bones, your breath. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the station floorboards, every gust of wind rattling the window made me sit up, certain it was him. My husband tried to reassure me, though. His voice carried no conviction. "They'll find him. He can't hide forever." But in his eyes, I saw the same truth I felt. Our boy wasn't hiding. He was hunting. 2 days later, another message arrived. This one slipped under the sheriff's door, written on the back of a photograph. It was our family portrait, me, my husband, and our son at 12 years old, his arms slung around my shoulders, his smile wide and innocent. Across our faces, he had drawn X's in red ink. On the back, scrawled in jagged handwriting, "I'll finish what I started." I broke then. The sob tore through me before I could stop it. How could the same boy who once clung to me through fevers, who once tucked wildflowers in my hair, become this a monster? Or had the monster been there all along, biding its time? The sheriff's men combed the woods. They found traces, a campfire, still warm footprints too large to mistake. But each time they closed in, he vanished. It was as though he knew their every move. And then came the night of fire. We were still at the station, trying to sleep on hard cots, when the bell rang furiously. A deputy burst in, panting. "Your house, it's burning." We rushed outside, the night alive with orange flames clawing at the sky. Our home, the place where we had raised him, where laughter had once lived, was devoured by fire. The heat blistered our skin even from a distance. Among the smoke and ash painted across the front door in black soot were the words, "Dead or not, you're mine." The deputies doused the fire, but the house was gone. Our memories turned to cinders. I stood in the ashes, shaking. He had destroyed the one place that tied us together. That, I realized, was his backfired plan in trying to erase us. He had erased the foundation of his own past. Because as the embers cooled, something shifted in me. The terror that had strangled me for weeks hardened into resolve. He could burn houses, he could scratch threats into walls, but he could not destroy the truth we had survived. His plan had failed. That night, as we sat under the sheriff's guard, I whispered to my husband, "We can't keep running. He wants us broken, afraid. But if we stay afraid, he wins." My husband looked at me, his face lined with exhaustion, but also something fiercer. "Then we stand." It was the first time in months we had spoken with such certainty. Our son's hatred had forced us into silence, but now his failure gave us back our voices. The sheriff urged caution. "He's dangerous. Let us handle him." But I shook my head. This is our family, our fight. If we don't face him, we'll never be free. And deep down, I knew the truth. He wanted us to face him. That was why he left the messages, why he burned the house, but not us. He wasn't done. He wanted an ending with witnesses. When dawn broke, ash still clinging to our clothes, I realized the battle ahead would decide not only our lives, but our souls. Would we be remembered as parents who cowered until the end, or as the ones who stood even when the threat came from their own blood? The backfired plan was his attempt to erase us. Instead, it lit a fire inside us, a fire he could not control. For days after the fire, those words lived inside me like an echo. "Pretend we're dead." 3 syllables that had carried us across the razor's edge of death. But words are not just sounds. They are truths, and truths have weight. I asked my husband one morning, when the deputies had finally given us a moment of quiet, why those words? Why not run or fight? He looked at me, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. Because running would have given him what he wanted. Fighting would have ended us. Pretending gave us a chance. A chance. That was all. Not safety, not victory. Just a thin line between breathing and silence forever. I tried to imagine what it had taken for him to whisper them, for his voice to stay steady, while the son he had raised stood over him with a knife. "Did you mean it?" I asked softly. "When you said it? Did you think we'd really live?" He rubbed his temples. "No. I thought it would buy us seconds. Maybe enough to change his mind. Maybe enough to pray. Seconds." And yet those seconds had stretched into hours, then into survival. But pretending to be dead changes you. It seeps into your skin. Lying there lifeless had forced me to bury not only my breath, but also every memory of love, every instinct to reach for my child. And when I rose again, I realized I had left pieces of myself on that chair. At night, when the station was quiet and the world outside hushed, I lay awake, replaying it. The feel of his fingers on my neck. The way my pulse thundered, begging to betray me. The way my husband's hand clutched mine, anchoring me to silence. Pretend we're dead. It was more than survival. It was surrender. Not to him, but to something greater, to the belief that life, however fragile, was worth lying for, worth enduring for. And yet, a darker thought gnawed at me. What if those words had become prophecy? What if, in pretending to be dead, we had invited death to claim us in spirit, even if not in flesh? I confess this to my husband. What if we already are dead, not in body, but in soul? He shook his head fiercely. No, we are alive. Every breath since that night is proof. But I could see the tremor in his jaw, the doubt behind his certainty. One evening, the sheriff found us in the holding room, sitting side by side in silence. He leaned against the doorframe and said quietly, "I've been on this job 20 years. I've seen men killed by strangers, by rivals, by chance. But when it's blood, when it's your own, that's a different kind of wound. It doesn't heal the same way." I met his eyes. "Then, how does it heal?" He didn't answer. He just tipped his hat and walked away. That night, my husband finally spoke the words I had been waiting for. I whispered because I couldn't bear to lose you. Not to him, not to anyone. If I had to sit there motionless for eternity, I would have as long as you were beside me. Tears filled my eyes. But we lost him. Silence stretched between us. He didn't argue, because we both knew the boy we had loved, the boy who once begged us not to leave him, was already gone. Still, the whisper remained. Pretend we're dead. A command, a memory, a haunting. The line that saved us, but also the line that divided before and after. The whisper haunted me most in the quiet hours before dawn. When the deputies shifted in their chairs, when the station lamps burned low, when the world was still, I heard it again. Not in my husband's voice, but in my son's footsteps, in the scrape of his knife, in the hollow silence of our home turned to ash. Sometimes I wondered if the whisper had planted itself in him too. Could he sense, even as we lay motionless, that we still breathed? Did he let us live, just to watch us writhe in fear afterward? That doubt gnawed at me. Survival was supposed to bring relief, but instead, it stitched new wounds. Every creak of the floorboards above the station, every voice in the hallway sounded like him. I lived with the certainty that he was still out there circling, waiting for the moment to finish what he had begun. One night, unable to bear it, I asked my husband again. "When you whispered, did you think of him? Did you hope he would stop, remember who we were?" He hesitated. His eyes glistened in the lamplight. For a moment, I hoped the sound of your stillness might jolt him back, that he'd see your face and remember birthdays, laughter, the child he used to be. But when he touched your neck, his voice cracked. I knew he wasn't coming back. Not then. Maybe not ever. I pressed my forehead to his shoulder, tears hot on my cheeks. Then what are we surviving for? If we lost him, what's left? He wrapped his arms around me, his voice rough but steady. For each other. For the chance that maybe someday we'll understand. And if not, then at least we'll still be here to try. The deputies did what they could. They patrolled the roads, combed the woods, searched abandoned barns. But the forest is vast and fear is clever. Each day he eluded them, each night he became larger in my mind, more shadow than flesh. Then one evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, I sat by the window and realized something. The whisper was not only a memory, it was a mirror. Pretend we're dead. Hadn't we done that long before the knife? We ignored the signs. We silenced our fears. We buried our doubts beneath hope, acting as though nothing was wrong. Pretending. Pretending our boy was still the child with wildflowers when in truth, he was already slipping away. I turned to my husband. Maybe we died long before that night. Piece by piece, every time we closed our eyes to what was happening. He looked at me, pain etched in his features. Maybe. But we're not dead now. We're still breathing. And as long as we breathe, we fight. His conviction steadied me. But deep inside I knew the whisper had changed us forever. It had carved a line we could never uncross. We had become survivors, yes, but also ghosts of the parents we once were. In the weeks that followed, whenever exhaustion closed my eyes, I dreamed of that night again. The knife glinting, his fingers at my neck, my husband's whisper. But in the dream, I did not stay still. I rose, reached for him, pulled him into my arms, and for a fleeting moment he was a boy again, sobbing into my shoulder, begging forgiveness. Then I woke, tears wet on my pillow, my arms empty. The whisper lingered in the silence after. One morning, as light poured over the station, I realized it had become more than survival. It was a lesson. Life is fragile, yes, but so is love. And sometimes the only way to protect one is to let go of the other, even for a moment. Pretend you're dead so that you can live. Pretend you're gone so that maybe someday you can return. I don't know if we will ever see our son again. I don't know if the boy who once made wishes over birthday candles still exists inside the man who carved threats into our barn. But I know this 3 words saved us. 3 words carried us through the dark. And whether they were command prayer or prophecy, they will echo inside me until my last breath. The fire had taken our home, but not every trace of our past. Among the ashes, the deputies sifted through the debris, pulling out charred fragments of paper-warped metal, the blackened bones of furniture. Most of it was unrecognizable. But one afternoon, a deputy brought me a box. "We found this under the floorboards," he said. Half burned but not gone. Inside lay notebooks, his notebooks. The same ones I had glimpsed before, filled with scribbles that chilled me. Many pages were ash edges, curled and brittle. But enough remained to tell a story. We opened them in the sheriff's office, my hands trembling as I turned each fragile page. Words leapt out in jagged handwriting. They watch me. They don't trust me. I'm nothing in this house. Another page. Every choice I make, they chain me. Every breath I take, they own. Page after page, accusation after accusation. And at the bottom of one, scrawled so deep the paper had torn, "When they're gone, I'll finally breathe." I pressed a hand to my mouth, the sting of bile rising in my throat. My husband sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, his knuckles white against the table. "Why?" I whispered. "Why does he hate us so much?" The sheriff leaned on the desk, his voice low. "Sometimes hate doesn't come from what you did, but from what they think you did. Perception becomes reality in their minds. But perception or not, the venom was real." We kept reading. The next notebook contained darker confessions, fantasies written like scripts. Scenarios of us disappearing, of accidents staged, of freedom finally his. He wrote of standing over our graves, breathing in relief. He wrote of silence filling the house. Silence he called peace. And then, Tucked between the lines, something more disturbing references to voices. They tell me what to do. They whisper at night. They say I'll never be free until they're gone. I exchanged a glance with my husband. Voices, I murmured. He was hearing voices. Madness or metaphor we didn't know. But it explained the hollowness in his stare, the way he muttered to himself, the disconnect between memory and hatred. Yet amidst the venom, one page stopped me cold. It was a list. Reasons I hate them. Some were cruel exaggerations. They never let me breathe. They always favored each other over me. But others cut deeper. They never listened when I tried to speak. They dismissed me when I was hurting. They pretended everything was fine. My husband swallowed hard. Is it true? Did we ignore him? I couldn't answer. Because in flashes, memories came back, times he had tried to talk when I'd brushed him off with, "You'll be fine." Times he'd sulked, and we'd told him to toughen up. Maybe we thought we were teaching him resilience. Maybe to him it felt like rejection. I closed the notebook, tears blurring my vision. We failed him, I whispered. Somewhere, somehow, we failed. But then I remembered the knife, the fire, the threats carved into our walls. Compassion tangled with horror. Love battled against betrayal. Could failure ever excuse what he had become? The sheriff spoke quietly. Parents aren't gods. You do your best. Sometimes it's enough. Sometimes it isn't. But at the end of the day, he chose his path. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to place the weight on his shoulders, not ours. But guilt is a stubborn shadow. Once it falls, it doesn't lift easily. That night, I sat by the window of the station, the notebook heavy in my lap. I traced the words with my finger, hearing his voice in my head, his voice as a child, not as the man with the knife. Don't leave me, Mom. Don't leave. But in these pages, he had already left us long ago. The days after discovering those notebooks felt heavier than the nights we had survived. The threat of his knife had been immediate, but this was a different kind of blade. Words carved deeper than steel. I found myself reading them again and again, as if punishment would bring clarity. My husband begged me to stop. "You're torturing yourself," he said. But I couldn't help it. Every page felt like a window into the boy we had lost, and maybe, just maybe, a clue to how we might get him back. Some entries were like storms, violent, jagged, filled with rage. They want to erase me. They think I'm weak. I'll prove them wrong. Others were quieter, more chilling in their calm. If they disappear, no one will know. The world will move on. Finally, I'll be free. But what unsettled me most were the contradictions. On one page, he cursed us, swore he wanted our blood. On the next, he wrote, "Why can't I stop thinking about when Mom held me during fevers? Why do I still see Dad smile when I caught my first ball? If they're monsters, why do I miss them?" Those words broke me, because they revealed a war inside him, between memory and madness, between love and loathing. He wasn't just our enemy. He was his own. One evening, I sat across from my husband, the notebook open between us. Do you think I asked carefully that he ever wanted us dead? Or did he just want the pain to stop? My husband stared at the torn pages, his eyes hard. Intentions don't matter when he pressed a knife to us. He crossed the line. But what if the voices pushed him? I whispered. What if he's sick? What if... My voice faltered. What if there's still a part of him left to save? He didn't answer right away. Finally, he said, "Then saving him might mean saving him from himself. Even if it means locking him away." His words hurt, but I knew they were true. Love without boundaries can become a noose. The sheriff tried to ground us in reality. "You two need to stop seeing him as your son," he said bluntly. "See him as a fugitive. That's what he is now." But how could we? How does a parent erase decades of love with a single act of betrayal? Every memory screamed against it. Every photograph, every laugh, Every tear tied us back to him, no matter how sharp the knife had been. The deputies intensified the search. Reports trickled in: a sighting near the river, a figure moving through the woods, a stranger asking questions in town. Always one step ahead, always just beyond reach, and always the reminders left behind. A toy from his childhood left on our porch, a drawing from grade school tucked under the station door. Each relic twisted the knife deeper. He wanted us afraid, yes, but he also wanted us to remember. One night I dreamed he stood at the foot of my bed. Not with a weapon, not with hate, but with tears streaking his face. "Why didn't you see me?" he asked. "Why didn't you hear me?" I woke sobbing, the echo of his voice clinging to me like smoke. The truth unveiled itself slowly, painfully. He hadn't only hated us, he had needed us. And when he felt that need go unanswered, it festered into fury. The notebooks were proof of his torment, yes, but also of his longing. He wanted to kill us, yet he mourned us at the same time. He wanted freedom, but feared being alone. And that paradox was more terrifying than his threats, because it meant he wasn't a clean enemy to fight. He was still our son, trapped in shadows of his own making. As I closed the last notebook, I whispered a prayer, not for safety, not even for justice, but for mercy. Mercy for him. Mercy for us. Mercy for whatever broken chain had led us here. My husband placed his hand over mine. "Whatever happens next," he said, "we face it together." Together. The word steadied me. But in the back of my mind, I knew the truth: one day, soon we would face him again. And when we did, it would not be words on paper that decided our fate, but flesh, blood, and choices. The notebooks left us raw, but also resolute. We could no longer afford to drift like leaves in his storm. He wanted us terrified, paralyzed. If we stayed that way, he had already won. One evening, after the deputies left our room at the station, my husband spoke words that surprised even me. "We've been running from him, hiding under whispers and shadows. That ends now." I turned to him, startled. "What do you mean?" His eyes burned, tired but steady. "If he's hunting us, then we change the game. We hunt him." The thought shook me. How do you hunt your own child? But in truth, he had stopped being just our child the moment he pressed steel to our lives. He had chosen another path, one carved in ash and fury. We began by retracing his steps. The deputies had found campsites in the woods, ashes, still warm footprints leading nowhere. My husband insisted we go ourselves. "We know him better than they do," he said. "We'll see what they miss." So under escort, we walked those woods. The trees whispered overhead, branches like skeletal fingers. At one site, I crouched by the remains of a fire. Among the charred wood lay a scrap of paper. I lifted it carefully. Scrawled in familiar handwriting were 5 words, still breathing, still not free. A chill ran down my spine. He was taunting us, but also confessing. He thought our survival meant his chains remained. Our breath was his prison. My husband clenched his fists. He thinks freedom means our death. Then we show him he's wrong. We studied the ground. My husband pointed out the broken branches, the disturbed soil, the faint direction of footprints. He had been here recently, very recently. That night, back at the station, we spread the notebooks and scraps across the desk. Each phrase, each angry line we read aloud, piecing together a map, not of places, but of his mind. Patterns emerged. He circled around familiar landmarks: our old house, the barn, the river where we once fished. He wasn't just hiding. He was orbiting us, bound to us even in his rebellion. He wants us to see him, I realized aloud. Every threat, every relic he leaves behind, it's a performance. He doesn't want disappearance. He wants confrontation. My husband nodded grimly. Then that's what we give him. The sheriff objected fiercely when we told him. "You're not bait," he growled. "You're victims. Let us handle this." But my husband's voice was iron. "If you corner him, he'll lash out blind. More people will get hurt. But if he sees us? He looked at me, and though fear clutched my chest, I understood. If he sees us, maybe he'll listen. Or at least, focus only on us. Reluctantly, the sheriff agreed to a plan. A meeting staged but controlled. We would draw him out at the riverbank, a place from his childhood under the deputy's hidden watch. It was dangerous, reckless even. But danger had already claimed us. Better to meet it on our terms. The night before, I sat awake staring at the ceiling. My husband dozed fitfully beside me. My hands trembled not from cold but from the weight of what was coming. Tomorrow we would stand before the boy we had raised, the man he had become, and the fate of our family would be sealed. Would it be redemption or ruin? I didn't know. But I whispered into the dark this time, not pretending but praying. Please, God, let him see us, not as chains, not as enemies. Let him see us as parents again, if only for one breath. Morning came with a sky the color of steel. Clouds pressed low the air, damp heavy with the promise of rain. We left the station under quiet escort, the deputies keeping their distance. It had to look as though we were alone. The riverbank hadn't changed much in all these years. The water still moved slow and wide, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple of a fish. I remembered afternoons when we had sat here with our son, lines cast into the water, his laughter ringing whenever a fish tugged at the string. Those echoes haunted the air, now ghosts of a family that had once been whole. My husband and I stood side by side, saying nothing. Our presence here was the message. We were waiting, and we knew he would come. The minutes dragged. Birds shifted nervously in the trees. My heart pounded, each beat counting down to something inevitable. Then from across the river a shadow moved. He emerged slowly, as if rising from the forest itself. Taller, leaner, his face gaunt, but his eyes burning. In his hand, not a fishing pole, but the same knife, its steel glint catching what little light the sky offered. For a long moment none of us spoke. Only the water whispered between us. Finally, my husband stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Son, we're here." Our boy's lip curled. "You're not supposed to be. You were supposed to be gone." "We're alive," my husband said. "And we're not running anymore." He laughed then, a sharp, bitter sound. "Alive? You call this living? You think breathing means you've won?" He raised the knife, pointing it at us across the river. "You're still chains. Every second you draw breath, I'm suffocating." My voice broke free before I could stop it. "Then look at us. Look at me. Am I chains? Or am I the mother who sat by your bed when you burned with fever? Am I the one who tucked you in? Or am I just the shadow you've painted in your rage?" For a heartbeat, his eyes flickered. I saw the boy inside the child who once pressed wildflowers into my hair, but the flicker hardened, and the man returned. "You didn't see me," he spat. "Not when it mattered." Silence thickened, broken only by the river's current. I wanted to run across the water to seize him, to shake him back into the boy I remembered. But distance and years stretched wider than the river. Then my husband spoke, his voice low but steady. "You think killing us will set you free, but it won't. It will chain you forever. You'll carry our blood like a weight you can never drop." Our son's grip on the knife tightened. His chest rose and fell with ragged breath. For a moment I thought he would leap into the water, rush at us, end it all here. But instead he whispered something I almost didn't hear. "You should have stayed dead." With that he turned and vanished back into the trees. The deputies rushed forward, but it was too late. He was gone again, swallowed by the forest. We stood there, shaken but unbroken. The confrontation hadn't ended him, but it had changed something. For the first time, we hadn't cowered. We had stood, faced him, spoken truth into the shadows. My husband squeezed my hand. "This isn't over," he murmured. "No," I agreed. "But neither are we. The riverbank encounter had left us shaken, but it also left a truth we could no longer deny: there would be no peace until we faced him fully. Not with deputies hiding in the trees, not with whispered prayers, but face to face, heart to heart, even if it killed us. The sheriff disagreed. He's too far gone. Next time we corner him, we end it. But my husband shook his head. If blood must be spilled, let it be ours, not his. He is our son. Whatever monster lives in him, it was born under our roof. I stayed silent, torn between fear and the stubborn ache of love. Part of me wanted the law to end it swiftly. Another part still clung to the boy who once slipped wildflowers into my hair. So we made our decision. If he wanted a reckoning, it would come from us. We returned to the ruins of our home against the sheriff's advice. The air still smelled faintly of smoke, though weeks had passed. Ash crumbled underfoot, and the skeleton of the house loomed like a monument to all we had lost. This is where it has to end, my husband said. That night we waited in the ruins, a lantern burning low. The deputies circled miles away, ready if called, but this meeting was ours alone. The hours dragged. Crickets sang, then fell silent. The forest seemed to hold its breath. And then he came. He stepped into the glow of the lantern, his face, gaunt eyes wild but not unfeeling. In his hand, the knife again, always the knife, as though it had fused to him. For a long time, none of us spoke. Then quietly he said, "You should have stayed dead." My husband rose slowly, no fear in his stance. "And you should have remembered you were alive." Our son's eyes narrowed. "Alive? You call this living? You chained me, caged me, smothered me." He raised the knife. "Tonight I cut the chains." I stood too, my voice trembling but firm. "If we were chains, it was because we loved you, because we wanted you safe." "Safe," he spat. "You ignored me, you silenced me. Every word I wrote, every cry, I was invisible." His voice broke on that word. Invisible. The fury cracked, and beneath it I saw the child again, the boy who once begged us not to leave him during fevered nights. Tears burned in my eyes. "We failed you," I whispered. "Maybe we didn't listen enough. Maybe we didn't see enough. But nothing can make us stop loving you." The knife trembled in his hand. His breath came ragged like an animal cornered by its own ghosts. "Love," he said bitterly. "You call this love. Then why do I feel nothing but chains? Because you let the chains grow inside you," my husband said softly. "Not us. You." For a moment, silence reigned. Only the wind stirred the ashes. Then our son screamed a sound torn from the pit of his soul and raised the knife high. The knife gleamed in the lantern light, suspended in the air like a question mark written in steel. My breath caught my heart hammering against my ribs. For an instant I thought the end had come, that all our whispered prayers, all our survival would collapse beneath one final blow. But my husband did not flinch. He stood tall, his eyes fixed on the boy we had raised. "If you must," he said calmly, "then do it. But know this, when you bury us, you bury yourself too. There will be no freedom in our blood, only chains stronger than before." Our son's arm trembled, his face twisted, torn between fury and grief. "Don't you see I'm already buried? I've been buried since the day you stopped hearing me." I stepped forward, tears blurring my vision. My voice broke, but I forced it steady. "Then hear me now. You are not invisible. I see you. I see the boy who laughed by this river. I see the child who begged us not to leave. I see the man who hates us but still cannot let us go." His eyes flickered, anger clashing with something softer, something wounded. The knife wavered. His breath came ragged, each inhale a battle. "Why now?" he whispered. "Why only now?" "Because now is all we have," I said. "We can't rewrite yesterday. But tonight, right here, you choose what tomorrow will be." The silence stretched thick and fragile. The lantern flickered, shadows dancing across his gaunt face. The knife lowered slightly, then jerked back up as though he were fighting himself. And then, in a voice raw and broken, he asked, "Do you forgive me?" The words sliced deeper than any blade. My knees buckled and I sank into the ash at my feet. Tears spilled freely down my cheeks. "I forgive the boy who was lost," I whispered. "But the man who tried to kill us, he must answer for what he's done." My husband nodded, his voice steady. "Forgiveness does not erase consequence. You need help. You need truth. And if that truth comes behind bars, so be it. But you are still our son." For a long, breathless moment, he stared at us. The knife slipped from his hand, clattering against the ground. He sank to his knees, his body racked with sobs. I wanted to run to him, to hold him, to cradle him, as I had when fever stole his strength. But I stayed rooted. Love warred with fear, forgiveness with survival. Behind us, the sheriff's men emerged from the shadows, their guns drawn. My son looked up, his eyes wide with realization. For the first time, he looked not like a monster, but like a boy, cornered, terrified. He whispered one last time, barely audible, "You should have stayed dead." Then the deputies seized him, dragging him away into the night. His cries echoed through the ruins of our home, fading into silence. My husband and I stood in the ashes, holding each other. Alive, broken, changed. The lantern guttered out, plunging us into darkness. And in that darkness, his whisper and mine tangled together, a haunting chorus, "Pretend we're dead." No parent imagines such an ending. No parent dreams of their child becoming their executioner. But life does not follow the paths we choose. It carves its own sharp and merciless. We survived. But survival is not victory. It is a burden we will carry into every dawn that follows. Was he villain or victim? Was he lost to madness or simply to neglect? We may never know. But this much is certain: love and fear can live side by side. And sometimes the greatest act of love is simply refusing to die.